Hey guys, welcome to our comic podcast. We have a name now, don't we, Sean?
Yes, we do. We are Comic Asylum.
We are Comic Asylum. Welcome to episode 1 of Comic Asylum. I'm Jesse.
And I'm Sean.
And today we're going to be reviewing Action Comics Volume 1 by Grant Morrison with art by Rags Morales and Andy Kubert. This book is the New 52 origin to Superman. And because Superman kind of kicked off, the whole superhero comic, we thought it would be fitting to start with a Superman origin story. So what did you think of the book, Sean?
Well, it was my first time reading it. I've actually never read any Superman comics before. So I liked it. It was interesting. Some parts confused me because I found it kind of jumbled stuff up a little bit. But I'll get more into that as we go along. But overall, I mean, it's pretty cool. I do want to point out that one of the very first panels in this story, Superman is holding the evil bad guy, Mr. Metropolis, over a balcony. And the panel says, it's Mr. Metropolis yelling, "Somebody save me." And I've actually just been currently rewatching Smallville. So when I saw that text, I read it as the song.
For those of you not in the know, that's the words, the opening for Smallville. I bet you that was put there intentionally.
I hope so, because it was hilarious.
I bet you that it was.
And every time I reread it, because I was like, no way. Every time I reread it, that's what went through my head.
Well, it's literally the words that kicks off the origin for the Superman, who's a very different Superman than he was before New 52. In case you didn't listen to our last episode, the New 52 was basically a reboot of the DC Universe that they did in 2011, where a lot of their characters got revamped, and Superman was one of them. So basically, Superman before this was, I think, getting a little bit stale in a lot of people's eyes. Superman kind of stereotypically is known as, the big Boy Scout.
Well, I mean, he upholds, the quote-unquote American values, right? You know, justice and liberty and peace and all this kind of stuff. I mean, whether you would attribute that to America nowadays is, completely subjective, but I mean, Superman was always this beacon of light, this beacon of justice and freedom, and, you can overcome anything kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. And this Superman's a lot more left-wing, I would say.
He's like Bernie Sanders in a Superman costume. It's hilarious.
Yeah. He's right off the bat fighting corporate greed. One of his first words, he's like, rats with money. I'm your worst nightmare. And that's...
Do you really have to do the silly voice with it?
Of course I had to do the silly voice for that.
Oh my God.
And it's really the... it's very jarring if you're not used to that kind of Superman. Right off the bat, you have a Superman with more attitude. And Superman in the 1930s, when he was created, started off as, very much that type of hero. He was created during the Depression. And he was, before he really had supervillains, he was taking down a lot of big businessmen that were kind of,
Well, that's the thing. Like as I stated, I haven't read Superman previous to this.
Yeah.
But the one thing I really did like is that he does stand for, the everyday citizen. He does believe in this true equality between rich and poor, and so forth and so on. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're doing wrong to people, Superman he's going to teach you a lesson.
Yeah. And I really dug, because we have seen Superman since then, because in the 1940s, he pretty much became a World War II propaganda piece, and then afterwards with the development of the comic code, which forced a lot of the comic books to become very kiddie and, lose a lot of their substance, Superman became very bland, and he has sort of had that war on corporate greed kind of feel to him before, specifically with Lex Luthor, because Lex Luthor's obviously a big businessman, but Superman has always seemed more reactive to that kind of stuff in the past, where it's more about Lex Luthor coming after Superman. But this is a Superman that is very proactive.
Oh yeah, and that's evident in the fact that he's working for, I guess it's the Daily Star.
The Daily Star, yeah.
Which is obviously a very left-wing newspaper. It's considered to be kind of a low-end newspaper that, in this specific story, I mean, Clark Kent is stirring anger with Mr. Metropolis because he's exposing his corruption when it comes to all the different labor issues, health and safety, and things like that. So he definitely is working for more like a left-leaning newspaper, and in his everyday waking life, fighting that with the risks he's taking. I mean, you see, in a couple of the panels, the cops are showing up and harassing him in his place.
Yeah.
So he's definitely, in both his Superman life and his Clark Kent life, very much pursuing this sense of worker justice, or this social democratic kind of value, which is why I said he's like Bernie Sanders in a Superman costume.
Yeah, I really liked how they put that in. And, also for the fact that it really justified him being Clark Kent in my mind. It wasn't just so that he could, have some downtime and put on some glasses and, live a normal life. It was so that he could basically fight crime in a way that he couldn't as Superman. And there's a line in there somewhere, I forget the actual quotation, but it basically, it's like, he's basically like, I'm a reporter, and it's like, well, it basically questions why he would be that. He's like, well, you can be as smart as you want, you could be, as strong as you want, but, you will always struggle to find those right words. Yeah. So I kind of like how, it's something that would creatively challenge Clark Kent the way that other normal everyday things wouldn't as well. I thought that was a really, really nice touch.
Yeah, I like that too. I thought it was, it's the alternative to, like you said, it's coming up with a third way solution. You're challenging the two-dimensional world in a third-dimensional kind of aspect. Yeah. And I kind of like that. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it was really cool. Even just I really dug the base costume with him running around in that Superman t-shirt.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
I thought that was so cool. Just it's like he has a bed sheet, and he went to Bang On and got a custom-made Superman logo t-shirt.
Yeah.
And he's wearing jeans, and he's running around town punching rich people who are doing bad things and beating them up. I thought that was awesome. I loved that. I was really hoping he would keep that look the whole book. I was like, I dig it. I think it looked cool. Street Superman. That was awesome.
It was cool. It really was Street Superman. And I think it really added something that the Superman character has been lacking for a long time. And, and throughout the book, obviously it gets more sci-fi from that point on.
Yeah, but it builds up to the sci-fi. It's not like it's just sci-fi off the bat. So, I'm a sci-fi person, but I found in a lot of the comics I've read, sometimes it's just too sci-fi when I wasn't anticipating sci-fi. So for me, it's kind of like, now they're fighting, a giant sun with an eyeball.
Yeah, All-Star Super. We watched All-Star Superman last night to kind of prep for this,
which was a little bit silly, but
see, I dig it because to me, in a story like that, all the emotions are there, and I don't really.
Oh no, I get it. I get it. It was a little corny.
Yeah,
that's the thing I liked about this was that it starts off just as this kid in jeans and this custom-made Superman shirt and a bedsheet run around stopping bad people. I do want to say, though, we are going to go a little more in depth with this comic, so there might be some spoilers if you have not read it.
Yeah.
Although, again, it is a Superman origin, so you probably already know the story because it's been retold multiple times, through live action, through reboots from DC. So just as a disclosure right there.
Yeah.
Because we're going to talk about this a little more in depth.
Yeah.
Overall, my opinion of the book, I liked it. I did have a few issues, mostly with trying to keep on track with what was going on. I find a huge difference between comics now versus comics back in the day.
Yeah.
There's less text. So they're trying to convey a story with less words, which at some points in this got a little confusing. Specifically, after Superman defeats Brainiac.
Right.
he's sitting in the, Fortress of Solitude he has in space. And then the next comic starts, and with almost no explanation, other super-like people are there, and the whole story unfolds there. I don't know who those characters are. So for me, that was a little confusing. Because they weren't even in the previous parts of this book.
Yeah. We'll get to that. But I kind of want to discuss the first main storyline in this book a little bit more first. So I earlier on I really, there were a lot of like little design things that I really dug. I'm not sure if you caught those like little, what were they called, robocopters, the little machine guns flying around.
Oh,
with,
yeah,
like, little
yeah.
helicopter
Those
things.
were neat.
Those were fucking cool. I really dug, the whole torture scene with Superman.
That was cool. That was interesting because he even makes a joke that he just needed to rest.
Yeah.
Until he got up and beat everyone to a pulp and continued being
I like
Superman.
Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor brings in this, like, I guess, little goat that Jonathan Kent kind of planted in the spaceship when they found Superman.
No, it was in the back of his truck.
Oh, yeah,
He took it instead, so he would throw them off when he got pulled over by the cops.
Yeah, you're right.
He'd be like, I have something you might be interested in.
Yeah, it was in the back of his truck. But Lex Luthor brings that out at the beginning, and Superman, he's like, this is what you look like in your real form, isn't it? And Superman just starts laughing. And
hysterically, like, his eyes glow red and stuff, and he's angry. He's like, ha, 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 ha. You're like, whoa.
Yeah.
It's almost like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It was because he just got, I guess, arrogant, but...
Yeah. And, overall, I thought that, I kind of dug how, for a Superman origin story, normally Lex Luthor is a little bit more front and center. And I'm glad that we kind of got to see Lex Luthor behind the scenes, manipulating and sort of playing his game, but not to the point where, Superman had come down on him by the end of the story and basically foiled everything.
Well, something else I really thought was interesting, kind of going off of that, is he's referred to as Dr. Luthor, going back to, because I did a little bit of research, going back to the days where he was more like a mad scientist as opposed to, this multi-billionaire evil tycoon, which I thought was kind of interesting because they didn't play, like Lex Luthor at the start isn't the main bad guy. And I wouldn't even say he's necessarily the main bad guy in this run. Yeah. I mean... As you go forward, Brainiac and the collecting stuff and all that kind of stuff, that was more where the emphasis on the bad guy was. Lex Luthor was kind of there, and he was like manipulating the behind-the-scenes stuff, but for his own personal gain. Where, I mean, that's what you expect of Lex Luthor. He's doing stuff for his own personal gain, but he wasn't like throwing money at the problem. He was coming up with like on-the-spot creative solutions to save himself. Yeah. Which I thought was interesting. They kind of played on that. He's more of an evil scientist versus an evil business tycoon. But they tied that, like we were saying, with Superman being more like a social democrat in this. They kind of tied that Superman fighting, corporate tyranny. They tied that in well alongside with Lex Luthor being not just a corporate tyrant, but an evil scientist. So I think the balance was there. I think that was really interesting, and I thought that was kind of cool. Again, like I said, I've been watching Smallville. So in Smallville, he's the son of a billionaire evil business tycoon, and he turns into an evil business tycoon. Yeah. So to have this different element to him as someone who's never read these books before, that was interesting to me. Yeah. I enjoyed that.
The other villains, Metallo, I thought got a little shafted in the story. He was kind of the one villain that I wasn't too crazy about his portrayal.
He's the robot guy.
Yeah, John Corbin.
Yeah, that's him.
He's sort of a B Superman villain, who basically is this guy who got sort of turned into a robot, but he's got a kryptonite heart. So he'll fight Superman, and his chest piece will open, and it'll be kryptonite.
Well, and that's, going back to what I was saying about, the text being shorter and trying to explain more with less words. I had no idea who he was. Yeah, because they don't even mention his name.
Yeah, it doesn't mention him as Metallo at all.
No,
does it?
you see him earlier on, like when Lois Lane shows up to the military base. Yeah, because her father is the general of the base. I guess they must have dated at some point because there seems to be some kind of history there.
I think, and I could be wrong about this. They could have added this in, because they've told Superman's origins a number of times, even since the 80s, right? I think that there's 3 or 4 versions that have come out since then. So they might have introduced it in one of those, but I believe that the Lois-John Corbin relationship actually comes from Smallville.
Oh, really?
I believe that's the first time that they did it.
I did not know that.
But
again, like I said, I just started watching Smallville.
Yeah, I think that's a later season, so they get into that.
That's cool.
But I believe that's something that they took from there. I could be wrong about that. Check your Wikipedia, kids. But I think that it was really cool how they took some stuff from Smallville.
Oh, we'll get into that because at the end, there was definitely a shout out to Smallville fans. And for me, watching Smallville right now, I was like, wow, that's awesome. But that was like the very end of the book. And I don't think it was actually related to the main story that this one specifically is trying to tell. So, yeah.
Yeah. And Brainiac, I thought, was really well handled. There was a line that we were both particularly impressed with. Would you like to do the honors of...
I really loved the idea that, Brainiac is describing who he is. And he's saying that, on Krypton they called me Brainiac, and on Earth they called me Internet. And I was like, whoa, you tied that into, real world. Yeah, that was
really cool.
And, watching the last Avengers movie, particularly with, Ultron.
Yeah.
The concept was cool, this evil software that kind of goes haywire and tries to, destroy humans because they're the scourge of the Earth and they're destroying the planet. But just in, the very few words that was used by Brainiac in that panel, I guess. Mm-hmm. To me, by saying, they've called me Brainiac, you call me Internet, I felt that almost creates an entire backstory that you could explore. It's just so few words gave so much detail into the existence of this individual or this, I guess, collective or whatever it is. This, Brainiac as Brainiac is. Mm-hmm. But I thought that was a great way to create a backstory for this villain. I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah, especially when you kind of take into account that he was partnered with Lex, so you can kind of see almost like a behind-the-scenes story in there somewhere of Lex sort of building up and being involved in this universe's creation of the internet. Meanwhile, just kind of on the phone with Brainiac, kind of getting,
Do you think Lex Luthor helped build the internet with the help of Al Gore in this universe?
I think Al Gore was a Brainiac robot in this universe.
You know what? I believe it.
Yeah.
I could see it. That makes total sense. But yeah.
And possibly in our universe as well.
Whoa. That's a conspiracy theory for another time. That got very meta.
Yeah.
That's a conspiracy theory for another time, no?
Yeah.
But no, I really like that. Like I said, in just a short amount of words, you were able to reintroduce a character in a reboot of a series that, for me, completely tied it to my world, what I know, and give it a rich backstory like that.
Yeah.
So that was really cool.
It was definitely a line that added a lot of depth and didn't just make it some big robot thing that came from outer space.
Yeah, well.
Yeah. I really dug the way that Krypton itself was portrayed in this. I thought that artistically the way that it was designed was beautiful.
Well, let's talk about the art. Overall, the art in this book I found was amazing. I loved it.
Yeah.
I thought it was really sharp. It was really, colorful. It portrayed exactly the image of Clark Kent they were going for and the image of Superman they were going for. Clark Kent is drawn as, this almost homeless-looking guy.
He kind of looks a little Harry Potter-ish, doesn't he?
I could see that.
Adult Harry Potter if he never got out of that cupboard.
And didn't have... Oh, my God. Okay.
Wakes up in the cupboard. It was all a dream.
Oh, my God. You just went there.
Yeah, it's okay, though, because he's secretly Superman. But... yeah, you did get a visual distinction between the two characters.
And my biggest complaint with Superman has always been, he throws on the glasses, he's Clark Kent. No one realizes he's Superman, even though he would look the same. But in this, they do a really good job of making them look different despite being the same person. And that's really reflected in this art. Mm-hmm. And that's what I really liked about it. It is a visually stunning piece of work.
Yeah, and Clark Kenton himself was he was a reporter. He was asking questions. He was getting his feet dirty. He didn't have to dumb himself down the way that Clark Kent does in certain Superman portrayals.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I really like that.
And again, like I said, that's all reflective in the art style of this Action Comics. It was really well done.
It did throw me off a bit in the last issue of this story arc in the book, because there are a few issues afterwards that kind of are its own storyline. But in the end, where he's getting the key to the city, the art changed, and that was a little jarring for me. I'm not sure if that was a deadline thing or what happened with that.
I mean, I kind of noticed it, but I didn't notice it enough that it affected me.
It was just because, I thought that Rags Morales did such a good job on the book that the last few pages, it was just like, oh, what? It's different.
Like I said...
And it was mid-issue, too, so it felt a little weird for me.
Yeah, that's fair.
But, yeah, overall, I thought that it was a great introduction arc for Superman. He got his costume. It was one thing that we talked about was that one scene where he's fighting Brainiac and he's got his costume, right?
Yeah.
And he's got the costume's white in the display. It's in a Kryptonian display, and he breaks it open and he grabs it and he puts it on, and then it kind of like morphs into the Superman colors. You're like, okay, cool. And then he kind of picks up the spear, and his costume completely
it becomes like red and gold, and you're like, what the heck? And it only does it for like 2 or 3 panels, and then it's back to the regular traditional Superman colors. I thought that was weird. I had no idea what was going on with that. I actually had to go back a few times and reread in case I missed something, but I didn't.
Yeah.
So that kind of confused me. I wasn't sure what really happened there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that threw me off particularly because it's definitely not a Superman costume I've ever seen in my life.
It was kind of out of nowhere, and I didn't get it. It's probably a reference to some older Superman story or some alternative costume.
That's fair.
But it seemed a little out of place. But overall, Grant Morrison's a writer who consistently comes up with a lot of big ideas and a lot of creative ideas. But sometimes his work can get a little confusing, or
Absolutely.
You might have to kind of go back and be like, wait a second.
I found I had to do that a few times. Again, he uses significantly less words to describe a scenario. And sometimes, like, when you're looking at... Because the art is the key, right? You're supposed to be looking at the art. That's the idea. So you really have to examine the panel that the words are on in order to kind of fully grasp what is going on.
Yeah.
And for me, I had to go back a couple times and reread a few pages because I was like, okay, wait a minute, what did I miss? It wasn't described in the words, so I had to focus more on the artwork itself.
Mm-hmm.
Which, slowed me down a bit.
Which I think is good, because to me, I think comics are a visual medium.
Oh, yeah, well, absolutely.
You should be using both words and pictures to tell your story.
Yeah, I agree with that. But as a new reader, it did throw me off. I was like, whoa, okay, what did I miss here?
Yeah.
So...
those are pretty much my thoughts on the opening story. What would you rate it out of 10?
I'd give it a 7.5 or an 8.
Yeah,
I'd
give it an 8.
It's a solid story. Like I said, it doesn't start off like super sci-fi. It starts off as just like the nitty gritty superhero. It takes place 6 months after Clark Kent has left Smallville and moved to Metropolis.
Yeah,
he's working for this small newspaper that is exposing corporate corruption. There's this build up, and the sci-fi elements slowly start to trickle in. And then yes, by the end of that, it's definitely a sci-fi. But it's not like it just threw you into a sci-fi. Mm-hmm. It was a build-up, which I really liked. So yeah, I'd give it like a 7.5 or an 8.
Okay.
The artwork, though, is the main reason I would give it that high.
Yeah.
Again, with the words that were used, the story is great, but there's so few words being used that I found it can be a little confusing at times.
Okay, I didn't.
But the artwork is what explains all of that, which is why I'm saying that I would give it that rating because of the artwork, which in my opinion did more descriptive. You know, it made it more descriptive for me to kind of really take in.
Well, I know that Grant Morrison, from interviews and stuff that I've listened to, has said that part of his process for writing is he'll actually kind of draw rough versions of the panels and then write down the descriptions in the script. So
that makes sense.
Yeah, I can totally see that, him being the type of writer that, you know, might kind of...
The story's solid, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It's just, again, it wasn't as descriptive as someone new coming into it might need.
Okay.
And for me, like I said, I had to reread a couple pages from time to time because I missed something.
Yeah.
Or I didn't focus enough on the artwork.
Yeah.
Which was the key to reading the story.
Oh, one other thing that the first time I read this, because I read this when it first came out, but when rereading it, one of the things I really liked was the inclusion of Steele. The first time I read it, it just kind of seemed like a B plot that was taking up, you know, time that could have been spent elsewhere. But rereading it, it kind of ends this arc emphasizing that this is sort of the birth of the age of superheroes. It says that it goes from a level 3 doomed planet to a level 4 planet, and, you know, which is basically its way of saying that, you know, things are different here now. And I really liked that we got Steele in this book because we saw firsthand how Superman's arrival in this world influenced people to become superheroes and go out and fight.
I liked that too, but again, I had no idea who he was because it didn't say his name. So I was a bit confused about its inclusion. It was great because what I really liked about it is that the stuff with Steele is taking place when half of Metropolis has been collected, miniaturized, and put into a spaceship. So you have this empty gap of, you know, a city, which is, in this portion of the city that was taken, is situated between two rivers, right? So what I like about that is it's showing the impact on Earth when Superman is up above doing his thing, but this is showing the impact of what's going on Earth.
Yeah.
And you have someone like Steele, and the main part of this story is that the rivers are now crashing into where this part of Metropolis was, and you have things like the ferry. So there's a ferry on the water that's about to get sucked down because of this void that's being filled down by the water. And what he does is he basically, I guess, flies by and pushes the current of the water enough that the ferry is able to get redirected away from the edge of the water and pushed back into shore to save those people. So it shows that for every action that Superman is doing, there is a consequence on Earth or, you know, elsewhere that has to be dealt with as well. And like you said, this inclusion of, you know, his arrival and this rise of the new superhero, it really kind of brings that together, which I thought was a pretty critical aspect because I find that a lot of the time in comics, you know, when the Avengers show up somewhere and they blow up half of Manhattan, there's virtually no consequence. Well, you just blew up half of one of the biggest cities ever. There would be a huge fallout to that. And that's what I liked about this, is that you see the on-the-ground action of what is going on while the bigger issues being taken care of elsewhere.
Yeah.
To me, that was a really great inclusion. But again, my only complaint with that is this guy just kind of showed up out of nowhere. I have no idea who he is. I'm a first-time reader. They never once mentioned his name.
Right.
I actually thought he was Cyborg.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's robotic, so I just assumed, that must be Cyborg.
No, he's a character from the 90s, from the death of Superman. When they killed off Superman, they had 4 replacements kind of filling Superman's shoes, and some of them were claiming to be the real Superman.
Only 4?
Yeah.
Really? I figured it would take at least an army to fill his shoes.
Well, you know.
I mean, he's an alien with super duper amazing powers.
Hey man, some of them had Superman powers.
Well, that's pretty impressive.
Yeah. Well, one of them was a clone of him, Superboy. Yeah.
Of course it was. Why wouldn't it be a clone?
But Steele was one of those, and then he ended up getting his own book. And actually, there was a Steele movie where he was played by Shaquille O'Neal.
That is awesome.
It is I don't know if awesome's the word that I would use.
Something for everyone who's listening to check out that movie right now.
Go watch Steele with Shaquille O'Neal.
That sounds amazing. Amazingly horrible, but amazing nonetheless.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, again, like I said, yeah. It was a cool inclusion. Relevant. I think it was relevant because, again, it's the on the ground.
Mm-hmm. But it wasn't something that, as a new reader...
I didn't know what was going on.
Which, I mean, considering that this is a new Superman origin and a relaunch, you would... Like, that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. And then right after that is, this other portion of the comic, Superman and how he gained his ability to fly.
Oh, yeah, the Legion of Superheroes stuff.
That was not explained at all and very confusing to me.
So, the Legion of Superheroes is basically a group created in the 60s. They're kind of an offshoot of the Superboy comic, which is basically the 60s version of Smallville, but with the suit and flying powers. But it's Superman as a kid in Smallville, having adventures and stuff. And basically what the Legion of Superheroes were they were a superhero team from the 31st century.
Yeah, they're in the future.
Yeah, and basically they were inspired by Superman to kind of create their group, and they come back to see Superman, but they come back too early and they meet Superboy. And Superboy ends up coming to the future with them and having adventures. And basically, because there have been so many reboots of Superman, there have been a lot of different versions of the Legion, because certain origins of Superman will have that Superboy kind of part of the character intact.
Yeah.
Where he'll have had his adventures with the Legion, and then you have different versions where he does not really do anything super until he's an adult and he's Superman. And that's kind of left the Legion of Superheroes in limbo for certain runs. Or I think that there was one time where they ended up going to an alternate pocket universe with the Superboy and teaming up with one of they kind of had to find some weird way to explain it because there wasn't a Superboy.
And I get that, but specifically with this story,
yeah,
I mean, this futuristic group of super beings show up and they have to go inside of Superman to stop this bullet that actually contains a subspace zone that can fit 30 people into it.
Yeah.
And they're trying to kill him inside. There was no explanation as to who these people were, though. They just were there.
Yeah.
They helped Superman get rid of the bad stuff in his head, and they fixed him, and they restored his spaceship that he flew in on from Krypton.
I mean, I thought by the end of the story they kind of did a good job of establishing... They were these people that met him as a kid, and they had some adventures, and now they were coming back when he was an adult to help him with this problem. I thought that was kind of clear.
Yeah, but when I first started reading it, I actually thought I maybe missed a book in between.
Okay.
Because, again, they appeared, and I have no idea who they are. They're from the future, and as a first-time reader, I was a little confused by that, so I actually had to reread that part again to kind of get a grasp of what was going on. I do agree it comes together pretty nicely at the end, but... On
that first
starting off, it was
I
was like, whoa, okay, because it immediately starts after the defeat of Brainiac and the restoring Metropolis back to its whole city state. So to jump from that right into this immediately with no introduction for these characters was a little confusing for me. I do agree that yes, as it progresses, it explains it better, but right off the bat, I thought I missed something in between.
Okay. I am glad that they threw them in that early, though, to establish that this is a universe where he has had adventures with the Legion. I think that was important to a lot of Legion fans to have established fairly early on in this run. But I can understand how, they could have maybe eased into that introduction a little bit more.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm coming from the perspective of a first-time reader. So for me, like I said, it was a little confusing. It got less confusing as the story progressed, but like I said, I thought I missed something because I was like, whoa, there's other super people now and they're fixing Superman. I was like, what the heck happened? Did I miss something in between? Where do these people come from? The future. Okay, well, it was pretty comic booky.
Yeah.
Which again, it's a comic book. It makes sense, but for me, it took a couple look backs to kind of figure out what was going on. But that part was good. I enjoyed it. And I guess, if they are kind of a pivotal part to the origin of Superman, it makes sense to do. Mm-hmm. So I look forward to seeing where they go from there.
Yeah. There have been some pretty cool Legion. I think that they even had a cartoon that ran for a little bit. Not one that I'm really that familiar with. I mean, yeah, the Legion of Superheroes is cool, and I'm sure that it's good that they established what was going on with Legion history, because that has been a huge problem for DC in the past, where they've had to constantly reboot and revamp different versions of the Legion to try and fit it in with that current version of Superman.
Yeah, I can see why that would be tricky. I mean, if you're constantly rebooting and you're changing their role,
yeah,
like the way this specific one went, yes, they were very, pivotal to the development of Clark Kent becoming the Superman that we see in this.
Yeah, and I liked how they kind of had that line about they gave him hope for like a future to fight for.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
I mean, that was cool. I liked that. And then
yeah, I guess we're moving on to your favorite.
My favorite part,
book.
which was not even relevant to the rest of it. So that was the main story.
Yeah.
This fight with Brainiac, the collecting,
Mm-hmm.
all this kind of stuff. That was the main story.
Yeah, and then
they had like a couple extra little things at the end.
Yeah, and I mean the Steele backup, I feel like we've pretty much already covered.
Yeah,
he has a fight with Metallo, which was kind of cool, and but the real part of that was great was kind of seeing him play damage control while Superman was in space.
Yeah, which is great.
But the backup that we're referring to now is the Smallville backup.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah.
So at the very end, they threw in like this extra comic-y portion, and it's Clark Kent leaving Smallville to move to Metropolis. So the 6 months before this main story started.
Yeah.
And it's him, Lana Lang, and Pete Ross all basically saying their goodbyes. And I was like, that's awesome. I thought that was a really cool addition to this.
Yeah.
It gave a stronger backstory, but it also, again, as someone who has not read Superman before and has seen the live action stuff, I thought that was a really cool inclusion.
It was a really nice nod to fans of that version of Superman. Without I think that it was really good that they didn't really focus on that in the main storyline. I
agree. I like the fact that when you start off reading, he's been in Metropolis for 6 months.
Yeah.
So you already established that he's new, he's there. What are we going to do with him? They think he's this mutant alien who's here to destroy them. And that's evident in some of the the art you see is they're protesting no aliens, we don't want aliens.
Yeah.
Donald Trump kind of rhetoric.
Yeah.
That you hear on a regular basis right now. But to go to this, this portion when he's leaving Smallville, his father is passed, and even the artwork in that, I mean, it was...
Well, his mom had passed in this version as well, I believe.
So actually, you're right, both his parents have passed, and he actually gives the farm to a family friend.
Yeah.
And what I really liked about this was that even the artwork, it was set up, like the Kent farmhouse, the house that they live in, looked just like the house in Smallville.
It really did.
I was like, what? That's awesome. I thought that was a really cool aspect to it.
Yeah.
But then again, like watching the live action stuff, for me, that being my frame of reference, it was really cool to see that in the comic. And this kind of goes back to what we talked about last week. The influence that the live action stuff is having on comic books. So you have this correlation now. For me, as a new reader, seeing that, I thought that was really cool because I recognized it. I could see why someone who has read Superman for, like the last 20, 30 years might be like, this is, it's pandering to the TV mainstream crowd. But to get me hooked, that right there sold me. I was like, this is...
Well, I
that
don't
was
think
my
it's
favorite
really
part.
pandering to that crowd because it's always been an important part of Superman's backstory. And,
But all the details are clearly taken from the Smallville TV show.
Well, I mean, the house, yeah, but, I mean, other, like, the Lana Lang, Pete Ross relationships have been there for years.
No, absolutely.
It was a nice behind-the-scenes character piece, especially since by the second half of this book, we've ramped up so much action.
Oh yeah,
that, you know,
to have that nice like heartfelt goodbye to his childhood when he's moving off to this big city. You know, he's off to do good. He's off to do, you know, these wonderful things to help people, whether it be through being a reporter or through being Superman. It really does kind of tie together all that action and kind of brings it back down to reality.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I liked about it. And that's, again, that was my favorite part. I was like, this is awesome.
Well, I think this book in general and this take on Superman did a really good job of humanizing him.
Yeah, absolutely.
You understood why he did the things he did. You understood where he was coming from.
One thing I do want to mention, too, just to add to this notion of Superman being this, you know, champion of the people, this almost like social democrat, this Bernie Sanders kind of person, they actually have, I don't remember if it's a whole portion or if it's just a flashback part. He's talking with Jonathan Kent, and Jonathan's telling him about how, you know, it's you have to maintain, you know, equality for everyone, rich, poor, it doesn't matter. No one is above the law. No one should be committing these wrongs. And you see those values instilled in him in this portion of the book at a young age. And, you know, as someone who, in this case, was raised by a farmer, that's pretty relevant because traditional farming values, you know, do reflect this more simplistic way of looking at things. Not simplistic. I don't want to sound offensive, but this, you know, no one is above anyone else, and everyone should be treated fairly and equal. And you see that being taught to Clark when he is younger. Yeah. And I thought that was a really, really crucial part of this, which reflects on the overall character at the start of this book that we see. Right? You see him as a kid being taught this, and then at the very beginning of this book, you see that in action.
Yeah.
And I thought that was an absolutely amazing part of this book.
And again, like it felt new, and it felt like a new take on Superman, but it was also very relative to how the character started out. Right down to the Daily Star was actually the name of the Daily Planet in the original issues of Superman, and then it was changed to the Daily Planet later on.
Is that because it sounded too communist?
I forget
Red
why.
Scare and all.
It might have been because of the radio show or because of the TV show. I'm not sure exactly why it changed.
Okay.
Or I believe it was sometime in the 50s.
That's interesting, though.
But it was originally the Daily Star, and then they switched it.
Yeah.
So that was a nice little nod.
That's pretty cool.
But yeah, final thoughts?
Really liked it. Like I said, I had to reread a few things from time to time just to kind of reestablish where I was. So it kind of jogged a bit. But overall, as someone who has not read any of these kind of, you know, comics before, Superman specifically, I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely recommend this for anyone who is interested in getting into Superman. This is a great starting point. I like the idea of the New 52 reboot because for someone like myself, it's easy for me to kind of jump in and learn the storylines. And you get new stories, you get new character development like we discussed.
Right. I
like that. So overall, I really enjoyed this. It was action-packed. It had some really cool art. Like the art, I love it. It was so well done. And, you know, there is that, you know, that throw out to, you know, the TV fans. So if you watch any of the live action stuff, you can see a lot of that stuff reflected in this, which makes it a little easier for someone like myself to kind of transition into reading it. So overall, again, I would rate it a 7.5 or an 8. I would recommend this as a read. I actually would like to read the second part now.
Yeah.
Because it sounds awesome, and I'd like to see where it goes from there.
Well, you know, I would give it an 8, and largely that's because of a lot of points that you brought up about, you know, as a new reader, kind of things kind of just not quite clicking right away. So, I mean, taking that into account, I think it would be an 8. But I thought the artwork was absolutely beautiful. Rags Morales and Andy Kubert both did a fantastic job with their respective parts of the book. And I'm a big fan of anything Grant Morrison touches. And, you know, he did a great job of making this character relevant again and bringing him back to his roots, but also making him very much the same Superman that he's been all along at the same time. So I would recommend it as well. fantastic read. It's actually probably, in my opinion, one of the better reads of the New 52, which as a long-term comic reader was hit or miss depending on the book. But this was definitely one of the highlights of the New 52 for me. And it got me interested in Superman comics in a way that I had not been interested in since probably the 90s and the Triangle years. And
I'll take your word.
Yeah.
I don't know what any of that is.
it's a period in the 90s.
I assumed it's the 90s.
Yeah.
It happened.
But great reboot for Superman.
Yeah, absolutely. So that has been this episode of Comic Asylum.
Yeah, join us next time. We will be talking about Batman the Long Halloween.
Which looks like a really big read. So
yeah,
I'm
it is.
gonna have to read it. Looks big.
Yeah, tune in next time to see what we think.
Thank you very much for joining us. Take care.